Today we have with us a man who was named one of the top 50 most influential individuals in technology by Silicon.com. He was voted number 3 behind Steve Jobs and ahead of Bill Gates. Here to share with you his expertise on autonomous vehicles and to get you thinking about the future of the auto industry, please welcome today's guest, Bernard Soriano, Deputy Director for the California DMV.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. As Larry said, I'm Bernard, and I'm one of the deputy directors at the DMV, and I'm responsible for the autonomous vehicles regulations in California. And so for today, I wanted to just kind of talk about what that means, where we are with autonomous vehicles, and kind of talk a little bit about the future. And how it might affect you and your world. So back in 2012, our governor signed SB 1298. And 1298 got written into statute, and it put the onus on DMV to develop the rules, regulations for allowing self-driving cars on California's roadways. And those rules were broken up into 2 separate pieces. One was for car makers or manufacturers to test their vehicles on the public roadways, and then the second part is the deployment of those vehicles, so the public operation of those vehicles, and whatever model a car maker would have. And so we started working on it, and when the assignment came, it was something that was new to us. I mean, we write regulations all the time, but we've never written regulations around the safety aspects of vehicles. And typically that's at the federal level, right? So NHTSA or US DOT, they have the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and all the car makers need to meet those standards in order to be able to sell that vehicle. Well, they all need to meet FMVSS at the time of sale. So we partnered with the feds, and then we started meeting with all of the different car companies. Because at first we thought, autonomous vehicles, that's just stuff that Google's working on or stuff that's pie in the sky. And then we came to realize that every single automaker is working on this. And they're working on it mainly from the standpoint of safety. And the statistics, you've heard those statistics. Right now on our roadways, I guess from last year, it's well over 35,000, bumping up to 37,000 people have died on the United States roadways. And the vast majority of those, about 94%, is because of a human choice. I mean, we do something as drivers that cause that crash. And I like to say we suck at driving. We can't drive, and it's not. I don't say it in jest. It's the truth. We drive too fast. We're distracted. We drive when we shouldn't be driving, and all of those factors come into play. And so car companies are working on technologies to help the driver. And these technologies, over time, are going to get to the point where the driver will cede control to the car. The car will make the driving decisions. And that's kind of where we are now. These car companies have developed, the OEMs as well as the Tier 1 suppliers have developed software to the point where driving decisions can be made in a reliable fashion. So our regs speak to that. We developed those testing regulations, and we've had them in place since 2014. And our focus has been on the safety of those vehicles. Our statute specifically says DMV will develop regulations to allow for these vehicles to be on the public roadways as long as the DMV is satisfied to the safety of those vehicles. And that's a big jump for us, because again, that safety aspect is at the federal level. The feds say what a car maker needs to do in order for that vehicle to be safe from a crash worthiness standpoint, from a crash avoidance standpoint, and the state's. Our responsibility is the safe operation of the vehicle. Our responsibility is that person in the car driving that vehicle responsibly and having the capability to accurately drive that car. With autonomous vehicles, it starts merging, right? Because the design, the build of that vehicle also incorporates how that vehicle is going to be operated. So what we said was, back in 2014, we developed those regs, and we said, okay, car makers, you can test on California's roadways, but you have to meet certain conditions. You have to have, at least, you have to demonstrate the ability to respond to a judgment of $5 million. And you can do that by either having an insurance policy, have a bond, or be self-insured. And most of these automakers that's not a problem. It's a problem for the mom and pop shops or the guy in the garage who thinks he can develop software. So we wanted to ensure that they had the ability to meet that $5 million threshold. We also said, if you are a manufacturer and you're going to be testing a self-driving car, a car that can drive without a person, you need to have a person in there. And that person needs to go through a training program that is specific to the technology. And that person also needs to be classified as a good driver. So they can't have more than 1 point on their record in the past 3 years. They can't be convicted of a DUI in the past 3 years. They can't be at fault. They can't be at fault in a crash in the past 3 years. And it's because we wanted them to be good drivers, right? And we also said, you can't take someone right off the street and put them in the car. You gotta have, they have to be an employee, they have to be a contractor, or a designee of the company. We also said that the driver, that test driver, during testing, needs to be in what we traditionally would call the driver's seat. So they have to be at the controls of the vehicle, which also brings up another aspect. These car companies are building cars so that the cars can drive themselves. So the manual controls, the steering wheel, the pedals, really don't need to be in the car. And we said, if you're testing it in California, you need to put those controls in the car. Even though they're not necessary, you have to put those controls in the car, and they need to be operational. So the test driver needs to have access to those controls. Any crash that happens needs to be reported to us within 10 days. And then on an annual basis, they need to submit a report to us and tell us whenever the technology failed. How did the technology fail? How often? Under what circumstances? We call that a disengagement report. So every year, they submit a report to us and they tell us, okay, I've tested so many miles in California and I've had all of these failures, and these are the circumstances around the failures. And then also, we said, for now, we realize that car companies are making these cars for passenger vehicles as well as for commercial vehicles. We said, okay, one of the things that we really need to be cognizant of is this public acceptance of the technology. And we didn't think it would be best if the public saw for the first time a fully laden 80,000-pound semi-truck driving autonomously. So we said, okay, we're not going to allow any vehicles over 10,000 pounds for testing, at least this go around. No motorcycles, also no trailers. So that's the construct of what we had. The regs went in effect in September of 2014, and immediately we issued 3 permits. VW Audi was the first one, Tesla was the second, and Google was the third. And to date, these are all the companies that have a permit. There are 42 companies that are permitted to test their vehicles in California. And you can see, oh yeah, I should say, let's make this interactive. So if you have any questions, feel free, just raise your hand, interrupt me, and I can address any questions. Go ahead.
Might not be a very very smart question here.
Thanks.
Tesla already has a feature on the vehicle where cars, someone drive on their own. What's the difference between that and the permits that you're giving out?
Yeah, so good question. So the question, if I'll repeat it, tell me if I repeat it wrong, is that the Tesla vehicles have certain capabilities now that allow the car to be driven on their own. And what is the threshold for what our regs cover relative to, say, the Tesla? Did I capture that right? Yeah, so that's an awesome question because our statute defines an autonomous vehicle as a vehicle that cannot be operated without the monitoring of a human. And so we have since moved away from that definition to one that's put forth by the Society of Automotive Engineers. And what SAE did was they classified, they had 5 levels of automation, actually 6 if you count one with no automation. And it goes like this. A level 0 car is a car that, like I drove when I was a kid. There's no automation whatsoever. A level 1 car is a car that has a single function of autonomy. So like cruise control. That's a level 1 autonomous vehicle. A level 2 vehicle is one that has 2 or more functions that help the driver. But the driver is still in control. And the driver still needs to maintain situational awareness. So a level 2 car would be like cars you see today. You have adaptive cruise control and lane keep. They work in conjunction with each other. So you can set that adaptive cruise control, you can set lane keep, you can take your hands off the wheel, your feet off the pedals, and the car will operate under certain conditions, will operate just fine. But you as a driver still need to maintain situational awareness, and you as a driver are still in control of that car. If something happens, you need to jump in, take over control. It's a level 2 car. That's a Tesla, right? And despite the marketing, despite the labeling, that's still a Tesla. Because for all practical purposes, that's what it does. Lane keep, adaptive cruise control. And yeah, exactly. A level 3 car is crossing that threshold. Level 3 car is all of these functions working together so that the car can drive itself and the human, the person in the car, can disengage from the driving task and do something else. And the car will be able to perform all of the driving functions under certain conditions. Then when those conditions come to the point where the car can't handle the situation, the car tells the human, okay, get ready, you gotta take over. And gives the human enough time to be able to take over. It's a level 3 car. Level 4 car is a car can drive anywhere, all by itself. Doesn't need to have the steering wheel or the pedals in there. And then there's the level 5 is a more advanced aspect of the level 4 car. So I hope I answered that question. But our regs, this is the important part, our regs only cover a level 3 car and above. So the Teslas are not covered by our regs. The stuff that VW Audi is working on, the new A8 that's going to be coming out, that is covered under our regs. The stuff that Mercedes is working on, the one that's just the next step after Distronic, that's under our regs. What's hard? Okay. Toyota's working on it as well, and they have their own system, and their advanced driving system is covered under our regs. The stuff that Google is working on definitely is covered under our regs. So all of these companies are developing software, or are car makers, they're OEMs, or tier one suppliers. They're all working on this, and they're all testing, mostly in the Bay Area, some in Southern California, down in San Diego or in LA, and then some also in the Central Valley by the old Castle Air Force Base. So you'll see the traditional automakers, VW, Audi, Mercedes, Tesla, well, not traditional, but Nissan. And then you see, the technology companies, Google, the tier one suppliers, Delphi, Continental, whole bunch of startup companies, companies that, weren't in existence 2 years ago. And what these are companies that are in Silicon Valley, software companies that have popped up, that have a bunch of venture capitalist money, and they're developing software in the hopes that automakers would utilize their software as the standard for autonomous driving. So a good example of that is GM Cruise, right there, Cruise. We started doing the regs in 2013. We started this effort. We met with all of these companies. We met with Google quite a bit. Then there was this company, Cruise, that started off. We first met them at the LA Auto Show in 2013. They had just formed. It was a bunch of guys that had graduated from MIT. I think there was 4 of them. Started their company. And candidly, I thought, my God, how can these guys be in the same industry as General Motors or Ford or Chrysler, or Nissan, Toyota? And lo and behold, they started developing software and caught the eye of OEMs. Last year, Cruise was purchased by General Motors, $1 billion. At the time, I think they only had 20 employees or so. They had a good weekend. They had, and that's just one. There's several of these that are in that same boat. There's a lot of money that's being poured into how the software is being developed. So you've got 42 of them. As I said, they all have to identify the vehicles, and they all have to say, I have a test driver in the vehicle. Out of these 42 companies, I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 or so vehicles that are being tested, and about 1,000 test drivers. And that number is going to grow because that company I just told you about, GM Cruise, they just figured out how to make these vehicles production ready so they can roll out these vehicles in a production fashion. So they've given us a heads up. They said, look, we're going to be adding more and more vehicles in the coming months. So those vehicles are going to increase. And I said, they're all testing. And as part of the testing, they got to report crashes that have happened. So to date, there have been 44 crashes. And this is the breakdown of those crashes. Google, who has since renamed their self-driving car unit, it's called Waymo. They've had 25 crashes, which kind of makes sense because at the time Google had the most vehicles. They had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 vehicles or so that they were testing. They've since cut back the vehicles. Delphi has 1, Cruise has 15. And as we sit here now, Cruise has the most vehicles being tested. And so we're getting a lot of crash reports. And then these others, Nissan, Uber, and Zoox, another startup company, have a crash. By and large, these crashes have been minor. And I'll describe the typical scenario. An autonomous vehicle waiting at a red light, and say it's going to make a right-hand turn. So it comes up on the red light, stops, and then starts to proceed to make a right-hand turn. And a car behind the autonomous vehicle comes up and hits it at fairly low speed, about 1 to 5 miles an hour. That's a typical scenario. Other scenarios, making a left-hand turn, somebody also hitting it from behind. And it speaks to this issue that is going to come up as these vehicles become more prevalent, and that is how we all behave around these vehicles. Because these vehicles are being programmed to follow all traffic laws. It comes to a complete stop at the red light before making a right-hand turn. It's going 25 miles an hour in a school zone. It's going 55 miles an hour on the freeway. And we are not used to that. Go ahead.
Question, what about when they hit a yellow light, you know, like, what are they gonna, where's the decision of the car?
Yeah, so at a yellow light, it's yielding.
Yeah, so
It's
what is the
yielding.
car gonna do react to driving the yellow? Is that, we just like, that second they come forward, they're gonna react the same way?
That's right, because you and me, I'm making an assumption. Me, light turns yellow, car's in front of me, I think that car's gonna go through the intersection, right? Yeah, that car's stopping. So I hit that's what's happening. And so there's gotta be this education to us as society, as drivers, as consumers, about what's happening, because those things drive like my grandmother, right? And we're not used to driving around with my grandmother. God rest her soul. You know, and so
That's awesome.
so that's one. It's making all of us aware that as these cars are coming forward, they're going to be driving conservatively. We as manual drivers need to be aware that that's going to be the case. We need to be aware that the car is going to let people merge in. It's going to yield at the yellow light. It's going to stop at the intersection. It also highlights this whole education about people that will own the cars need to know what the capabilities of the cars are, or more important, what the limitations are of the cars. Just like the Tesla, right? You need to be aware that your Tesla doesn't mean you can zone out and you push a button and you can zone out. You still gotta keep awareness. So there's this education that needs to happen. So by and large, like I said, they've been very, very minor. There have been some that have not been so minor. Google, Valentine's Day last year, 2016, thank you. Valentine's Day. So in the Bay Area, I think it was on El Camino Real. They were coming up on an intersection, they had 3 lanes. Their autonomous vehicle was in the far right-hand lane. It was approaching the intersection, and it was going to make a right-hand turn. Light turned red, and there are cars in front of the autonomous vehicle, and so everybody stopped. And there was room in the lane for 2 cars. The autonomous vehicle scooted over in the same lane and started passing all of these cars, heading up to the intersection. And there was a grate in the road, and there was sandbags that had surrounded the grate. It had rained earlier, and so it came upon the grate, and the sensors sensed the sandbags and said, "I can't go. I got to go around." And the light turned green, so all the cars started going, and the autonomous vehicles started to merge in with traffic as all the cars were going forward. And as it was merging in, a big articulated city bus was coming down in that same lane. The software was programmed to say, that bus sees me, that bus is going to yield, so I can go. And that's what happened. The car went. The bus driver saw the guy and said, I still go. And so there was a collision. Luckily, nobody was hurt.
Also, one
They got-
question before you get
Go ahead.
When it's stop sign, also, some of them becoming, right?
I'm sorry? At a stop sign?
At a stop sign, some of the stop sign, you can make a right turn.
That's correct.
That-
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll speak to that in a second. So this is the Google crash that happened. It was an articulated bus. The Google vehicle hit where the doors were in the middle of the bus. We ripped off there was a sensor over here that got wedged in. We met with Google. They showed us the data. They had video of it from the car. We met with the Transportation Authority. They showed us the video from the bus, both looking out as well as the reaction of the passengers in the bus. And Google said, yeah, we got to revisit our software. We got to see what had happened. Go ahead. Yeah, so on that one, we don't assess blame. We don't assess blame. We just collect the data.
The insurance companies, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we're leaving it up to the courts as well as insurance companies, because for us at this point, it's not something that we needed to get involved in. But Google clearly said, yeah, okay, the way that we programmed it maybe shouldn't have been the way that we did. So they've revised it. And Google also has the capability to take all of the data from the sensors and run it through simulation so that they can do it virtually, run through all those scenarios over and over again until they can refine it to their satisfaction. So that's what happened. I want to bring up another point, and that is how crashes get reported. I mentioned that most of them have been very minor. A crash occurred with, I think it was a GM Cruise. Again, it was in San Francisco. The GM Cruise autonomous vehicle was making a left-hand turn at the light. It was a controlled light. So it was waiting for the red arrow to turn green. It was 2 lanes turning left. It was in the outside lane. Light turned green. Autonomous vehicle started to make its left-hand turn. The car on the inside started veering out, so the autonomous vehicle stopped. There was a bicyclist behind the autonomous vehicle, following too closely, not paying attention, so the bicyclist ran into the car. GM Cruise reported that as a crash, even though it was, car, bicyclist. Car wasn't the one that was, clearly wasn't at fault. The headline the next day was, self-driving car collides with bicyclists. And it kind of highlights the fact that, these articles tend to be sensationalized when really it's not, it really isn't what had happened. So we try and make it so that they aren't, that they're factual. So we've been working with all of the companies, especially when, you get all of these. All of the crash reports are posted online, so if you care to look at them, we have them on there. And then those disengagement reports are also online.
And these are unmanned?
No, they all have to have a driver in it. Right.
So going forward, is the software going to know how many occupants are in the car?
It could. And so the question was, going forward, would the software in the car know how many occupants are in the vehicle?
Here's what I'm thinking. How close are they to being able to decide if a kid on a bike comes out of nowhere and it goes in front of the car? You can't go in the opposite lane because there's a big truck coming.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to hit the kid. It can go down the embankment, but there's 3 people in the car. How's it going to decide what it's going to do?
That's a topic of debate now, because so what he's asking is this ethical question is, if a car is in a situation where it needs to make a decision, and either choice is going to be bad,
Right.
who gets to play God? Right. Exactly? Do you hit the little kid on the sidewalk, or do you hit the bus with 20 people on it? And that's a question that comes up quite a bit. They call it the trolley problem, because even though I would venture to guess none of us have ever faced that situation in our driving career, and the possibility of an autonomous vehicle ever coming into that situation, the reality is someone has to code that in to the software. And how does that person code that in. It's an ethical question that needs to be answered. And the manufacturers at this point, their philosophy is, let's never get in that situation. Never get in that situation. But if you are, if the car is in that situation, let's do what you would normally do. If you are in that situation, what do? You react to try and not get into that collision. And yeah, that's a tough question, because who gets to say what the right answer is? And it's one that's being debated now within the auto industry. So those are the crash reports. Like I said, they're online, and the disengagement reports are online. Yeah, so the way that it's right now, it's all testing. Right now, we just have the testing regulations. 2 days ago, California, we released a revised set of regulations for completely driverless testing. So now we take out the driver from the car. So GM can test their vehicles on our roadways without a driver, once these regulations are in effect. And we're working towards having them approved by the end of the year, and then effective sometime the beginning part of next year. So if that holds true, a car company can test their cars in California without a driver. And then those regulations also speak to the deployment of those. So a car company can sell their cars without their completely driverless cars once those regs come into play. Go ahead.
Do you have the statistics on how many times the driver in the car had to intervene to avoid an accident?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Those disengagement reports speak to that. Those disengagement reports say, I'll pick a company, VW drove, I don't know how many, let's say 200,000 miles in California. And of those 200,000 miles, there were, I'm making up numbers, I don't know the exact same one, they're in the disengagement reports. Say there were 200 disengagements. For each one of those, they're going to describe, okay, the disengagement that happened on February 12th happened because, the sensors couldn't see the sign because of the sun glare. And so had the driver take over. Or the driver manually turned it off because the driver felt that the situation was one that the software wouldn't be able to handle. And that happens. You'll see in one of the reports, the Google car was going down the street, and there's another street that came this way and dead end. And so it needed to make a right-hand turn there. So the Google car was going down. It sensed the car coming this way. You couldn't see it yet because it was around the corner, but it sensed it with the sensors. And then all of a sudden it was there, you could see it. And the driver saw the car. And the sensors were saying, that car is going too fast. That car is not going to stop. And so the car slowed down. The autonomous vehicle slowed down. The driver turned off the autonomous vehicle and said, why is this car slowing down? I'm turning it off, I'm gaining manual control, and started moving. Maintained the speed. And as it maintained the speed, sure enough, the car came, ran the stop sign, and hit the autonomous vehicle. So the question is, if the driver didn't disengage, would the crash have happened? And some would say, no, it wouldn't have happened because the car sensed it. The car was going to slow down, right? And so in some cases, the human taking over is a bad thing. And so, because we suck as drivers, right?
That's what's going to happen. They're going to get rid of drivers, right?
Yeah, okay.
At some point they're going to say, look, we have all the data, we have all the numbers, we know for a fact that humans cause way more fatalities in traffic than our systems do. And so...
Yeah, that's one utopian view. And that's certainly one that is shared with some companies.
Yeah, plus grandma can go to get her prescription now.
So like Google says, that is the worst situation. Google says the worst situation is this level 3 car a level 3 car is way more dangerous than a level 4 car. Because the level 3 car depends on the human being able to take over if the software can't handle it, right? And having the human regain situational awareness and take over in a short amount of time is a tough problem. It's tough. And so to remedy that, let's take the human out altogether. Let's just make the software do it. Software does the work. The software can't handle it. Have the car go into a safe mode. And so, because it's way more dangerous to have a human take over. That's their philosophy. At the same time, other car makers, like BMW, I mean, they said, we were in meetings with them, they go, look, we're never going to be the ultimate self-driving car. Right? Because you want the BMW experience. You gotta be a driver. You gotta handle that, right? And so that's their philosophy. So you have these different philosophies of how it's moving forward. So some companies feel like, yeah, like me. I love driving. I have an F-150. I love getting in that truck and just driving in the country without any destination. I'll drive and I'll go, oh yeah, I want to make a right-hand turn here, I'll do that, right? But there's situations where, okay, I let the car take over. I'll seat control, like even stop and go traffic.
Right.
And so, but for the most part, I want to be in control. And I would venture to guess most people of our generation or most adults at this point feel the same way. I don't know about my kids on how they're going to feel when it's time for them to own their own vehicle. So, go ahead.
So how are this comes to Texas, whatever it is, you know, maybe sooner than later, are we gonna require a driver's license? Who's gonna be the insurance, who's gonna cover the car or the person?
Yeah, those are all questions. So the questions he's asking is, in the future, are we not going to allow not to have driver licenses? What about insurance? Yeah, those are all the questions. It's disrupting this industry.
I'm sure on this, they have to be presenting studies for all these things and the studies of the future of autonomous vehicles. One of the positive points that I've heard about autonomous vehicles is that it'll help with traffic congestion. Has there any data provided that shows what kind of a decrease in automobiles will be based on because of the autonomous cars?
Yeah, so there's been some studies, although a lot of them are just projections at this point, because there's not enough data to come to a conclusive, to some conclusion. Some people say, yeah, it's going to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Some people are going to say it's going to reduce, congestion. Others are going to say, no, it's going to have the opposite effect at first. There's going to be more congestion because this is another scenario, is that vehicle ownership and vehicle usage. Some say that vehicle now can be used much more effectively. I take my autonomous vehicle to work, I get out, it doesn't park itself, but it'll go someplace else and give somebody else a ride, or go do something else without me in it. And so, if that happens, there'll be more and more vehicles on the road. And so no one knows at this point, just a lot of conjecture. So that's where we are with the regs. And I mentioned we've got these regs, the revised regs that we just put out 2 days ago. The public comment period ends at the end of October, and we're looking to have those regs be approved by the end of the year. I wanted to talk a little bit about how fast this may happen and how quickly things change. Because, like I said, when we first started working on it back in 2013, we thought this was so far away. And then we find out that all these car makers are working on it. And then we find out these car makers have projections of vehicles being on the road by 2020 or earlier. And, it's disrupting our industry, but it also is something that's emblematic of how change can happen so quickly under the right circumstances. So this was Fifth Avenue in New York City, 1990. I think it was Easter in that day. See, it's all horse and buggy. It's all horses. There's one automobile there. One automobile. It's right there. Just one. 13 years later, Fifth Avenue, New York City. No horses. None. In a span of 13 years. We went from horses to none in 13 years. So new mode of transportation. Everybody just adopted it. First powered flight. Wright brothers flew that thing in 1903. 5 years later, airplanes were being used for general aviation. World War I was in what, 1911? It started. Airplanes were being used there. So, just really quickly, things can happen really quickly. 1980s, cell phones came out. Big, humongous things like that, right? Remember, you have to carry around the battery pack. AT&T, at the time, AT&T owned the telecommunications world. And they said, okay, so this technology comes out. How many people are going to own that? How many people are going to have cell phones by the year 2000? So AT&T hired McKinsey and Company, the preeminent management consulting firm. You go to Harvard, you go to Stanford, and you graduate, you work at McKinsey. McKinsey looked at it, and then they said, okay, by our estimates, by the year 2000, 900,000 people are going to have cell phones. The actual number was 109 million. They were off by 100 something, almost 200. They were off. The smartest people they come up with this. And as a result, AT&T did not jump on the bandwagon, and they weren't prepared to take advantage of this disruptive technology. So the year 2000, there was 109 million people with cell phones. Today, there's more cell phone contracts than people on this planet. It just, in a span of, just a blink of the eye, it happens fast. And it happens because technologies sort of converge. So like smartphones, right? Smartphones, we all have smartphones now. 8 years ago, they didn't exist. There was no smartphone 8 years ago. We had cell phones, the flip phone, but we didn't have smartphones. But now everybody has one. Why? Because not only did the phone be a device to talk, but also take pictures, get on the internet, conduct transactions, do all of these things. It converged. And so everybody started adopting on it. And autonomous vehicles seems to be going that way. The projections are that autonomous vehicles is one aspect of how the car industry is going to migrate towards. The car industry in the future, some people are saying, is going to be autonomous, they're going to be connected, and they're going to be electric, and they're going to be shared. I don't know how true all of that's going to be. I'm just repeating what I've heard. The autonomous is cars driving by themselves. The connected is the infrastructure having the capability to talk to cars using DSRC, dedicated short-range communication, and cars being able to talk to each other. So that the scenario where in the city, two vehicles approaching an intersection, the two vehicles will know each other, right? So NHTSA has put out a notice of proposed rulemaking so that every new vehicle think it's model year 2020, will have DSRC capability. They'll have the capability, the software needs to be developed to be able to take advantage of the capability. And then cities need to also be able to, or will be looking at how to update the infrastructure to provide street lights, street signs, buildings with the capability to communicate to the vehicles. So that's the connected world. Electric, getting away from the internal combustion engine, and then the shared model, where vehicles now are, where the concept of private ownership is being looked at. Is that something that society is going to continue to utilize, or is it going to be one where instead of a person buying a car, a person buys the miles that they travel? So I pull up an app and I say, take me to work, and the car shows up and takes me to work. I don't know, my personal belief is that it works in some scenarios, like highly urban areas, but in rural areas, if I'm in Nebraska and I'm in the middle of a cornfield, I'm not going to wait for a car to come and pick me up. I'm going to get my car and go. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bernard, following that same logic, do you see the difference in some of these manufacturers? Do some have a vision where it's more shared, where others may see it more as ownership, or can you tell us?
Yeah. This one was surprising. General Motors, stodgy General Motors, Detroit, manufacturing, right? It's General Motors, who has a hard time being nimble, they told us this. Said, our vision of the future is autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. And they said, we think this is where the industry is going to be going. Now, how they do the shared is a big question, because is it going to be owned by a manufacturer and they operate it as a fleet? In which case the whole liability issue is more easily answered than with a private ownership, right? Back to your question about liability. In our regs, our proposed regs, you'll read it in there. It says a manufacturer will be liable for any crash that occurs that is the result of the autonomous technology. So if the autonomous technology causes the crash, manufacturer is liable. And but if it's one of these where the autonomous vehicle is a level 3 car, comes upon a situation and says, I can't handle this, human, you take over, and the human does take over, and then there's a crash, the manufacturer says, yeah, that was me, that's the guy sitting in the car. So, how to determine that, right? But, yeah, so others are still looking at the traditional mode of I build cars, I sell cars. Yeah, so it's a mixture.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's the what we've heard about the future. I'll leave you with this. I get a chance to talk at schools, like elementary schools, middle schools, and my education is in engineering, so I have this love for science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM programs. And so when I talk to the students, I like to encourage them to pursue a career in STEM, and how rewarding it could be. So I was at a middle school a couple years ago, and I get these thank you letters, and after I gave a talk. So this student said, Dear Bernard, thank you so much for coming to Bohan's middle school, college, career day and talking to us about your career. Something I learned from you is what you have to do to become an engineer. I'm like, all right. One thing that impressed me about your career is how you work on self-driving cars. Because of your presentation, I have decided to become a lawyer. I really appreciated you. Sincerely, Alejandro. Hats off to you, Alejandro. He is one brilliant kid. As he sees what's going to be happening in the future, and the legal arena is going to be right with work. Go ahead.
Broad question. We know that, of course, the government's into the regulation and what's happening, and we know what they're putting on to the that car manufacturers to electric cars already. They have to produce them ready. What's going to happen? What do you see, or can you see, to talk about as a time frame that they'll start removing some of these cars that we're driving now off the
Yeah, the way I see it is that it's going to be organic. It's not something that we're going to. I can't see, and again, I predicting the future here, but I can't see government, either federal government or state government, mandating that the cars that we have, my F-150, can't be allowed on the roadways. That's not out of the realm. I gotta say, that discussion has happened. There have been discussions, because California has the greenhouse gas goals. These autonomous vehicles are being looked at as maybe we should mandate that autonomous vehicles be put on an electric platform. Now that's one group that's saying that. We're not saying that. In fact, our regs don't speak to that. But that issue has come up. The issue has come up that maybe should local jurisdictions, like San Francisco, should San Francisco look at the downtown grid, financial district, and say, okay, no manually driven cars can go in there. If a vehicle goes in there, it's got to be autonomous. That has happened. Those discussions are there. I have a hard time seeing that happen, but then again, a lot of things have happened that I thought would never happen. Any other questions? Go ahead.
It's funny you said buying a car or buying a miles. Right now, the electric cars is all over. You can buy them.
Yeah. Well,
Most of them.
yeah,
Most of
Tesla.
them are electric cars.
You can buy the Tesla. Then the whole issue about, yeah, then the whole issue about vehicle miles traveled and, paying for the maintenance of the roads comes into play. About the gas tax and so forth. So all of those, it gets to be pretty complicated. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Do you have a projected cost of one of these vehicles in 10 years?
Yeah. Nissan has said that their goal is that in the short term, they'd like to offer, they've put their technology on the Nissan Leaf. They'd like to offer that as a technology package and for no more than $10,000 off of what the base price would be. And they said, we'd like to get that down even more. That's the only one that I've heard that has come up with a number. But safety advocates are saying that, look, if this is such a boom to safety, if we're going to save upwards of 30,000 people's lives on our roadways, right? If that's going to happen, people shouldn't pay a premium for that. I mean, that should just be on people's cars, right? It said, what is it? It's like two 747s crashing every week. If that happened, we'd all be up in arms. But it is happening on our roadways, and we're not doing anything about it. And so that's what the safety advocates are saying. Any other questions?
When you talk about the shared miles and this and that, basically we have to get a card and then stick it on like a regular taxi or how would it work?
Well, yeah, one of the models is that you don't own the car, but a company owns the car, and you pull up an app like your Lyft app, and that car comes and shows up and takes you, but you don't own it. Other models is that you do own it, And then you get a little something, something when your car's doing that.
Well, for used car dealers, where are you?
Yeah, that's a, you know, and for used car dealers, like, so this is why I see is that the way this technology is rolling out, some people think it's going to be like that, right? I think it's going to be not a step function, I think it's going to be a ramp. You're going to see more and more driver assistance systems on the car. You see a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and then the car's going to be able to drive itself. And those cars are going to end up in your lot. You're going to have to know about them. You're going to have to know about the features. And I think that's kind of how it's going to go. But again, I may be wrong. It may be one of these like the airplane or the horses, right? Where all of a sudden, in 2-3 years, it's here. So I can't, I mean, there's no way, I can't predict the future.
No, I'm asking a future question.
Yeah.
It's not easy to answer.
No. Any other questions? Okay, well, that's my contact. Feel free. Reach out, either email or call. And I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. But yeah, I would be more than happy to try and answer any questions that you all have. I'll stick around a little bit afterwards if you guys want to come up and talk to me. But I wanted to thank you all. Thank you, Larry, for having me over. Thank you.